Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Price Check Podcast here on the In the Zone Network, where we go city to city, state to state, worldwide. We got ourselves a series in the NBA Finals, ladies and gentlemen. Tied one game apiece after Miami Heat steal game 2 on the road in Denver, 111 to 108. We just gotta get right into it, man. Miami came out like gangbusters in the fourth quarter of that game. After being down as much as 15 points in game 2, down 8 to start the fourth quarter. They go out, put up 36 points in the fourth quarter to Denver's 25, shoot 11 for 15 from the field. Just absolute craziness. You got Max Strus and Duncan Robinson hitting 3 after 3. Gabe Vincent getting big buckets after big buckets. And Jimmy Butler just kind of managing and coordinating the whole thing. So Miami pulls off what a lot of teams haven't been able to pull off either this regular season or playoffs, and that's beating Denver in Denver. And so big game 2 win for them, 111 to 108. This Heat team, man, for whatever reason, they continue to fight, continue to claw their way into some of these games, and again, pulling games out that you just had no expectation of them being able to win. So we obviously are going to get into game 3 here, but got to take a look back at game 2 to figure out how we kind of got to this point. So Denver, of course, the big thing for them was they did not respond well to the zone defense that Miami put out there. Now, I made a point before game 1 of Denver being the best team not only in the regular season but also this playoffs against zone defense. That really hasn't shown itself to be the case in this series so far. You look back at game 1, they didn't really play that well against the zone, but they had a big enough lead to where fourth quarter came around. It really didn't matter if they were able to break that zone or not because they were already up close to 20 points. Ended up winning that game by 11. Game 2, not the case. Miami came out the gate up, I believe, 25 to 10 to start the game. Now, they gave that lead back, of course, and Denver fought their way back into it. But as that game got later into the third quarter, into the fourth quarter, that zone defense really turned out to be a benefit to Miami. Now, they also got Kevin Love back, who, of course, not the greatest defensive player, but helps from a rebounding standpoint. Also gives you another shooter out there on the court. Brought him back into the starting lineup, bringing Caleb Martin off the bench. So from a strategy standpoint, we saw, Eric Spoelstra be able to pull a couple different cards and play those. So how does that factor into what we're expecting to see tonight in game 3? So biggest thing to know here, because we also have to look back at not only just the result of game 2, but kind of how we got to that result. Miami won that game, but as I mentioned, they were down as much as 15. They were down 8 going into the third quarter. They started the quarter, I believe, like 7 for 7 from the field. You had Max Strus and Duncan Robinson combining for 24 of their 36 points in that fourth quarter. Gabe Vincent with 23 points for the game in game 2. Still only being able to pull that game out by 3. I mean, Jamal Murray had a shot to tie the game at the end of the ball game there, at the end of regulation. Didn't get it to fall, but Denver was still in this. It was not a game that Miami, got this great performance for their team and then got a blowout. They barely pulled this one out. So, factoring all of that into what we expect to see tonight, I do think we're going to get another close game here in game 3. Now, one thing to also keep in mind about these game 3s in the NBA Finals when the series is tied 1-1. This has happened 40 other times in NBA history that we have a NBA Finals series tied 1-1 after 2 games. In those previous 40 instances, the team that wins game 3 wins the series 32 out of 40 times, 80% of the time. Pretty daunting, right? Now, what we also have to factor in there is out of those 8 teams that have lost the series, 3 of them have happened within the last 10 years. We just saw one instance last year where Boston and Golden State were tied 1-1 after 2 games. Boston wins game 3 at home. They don't win another game the rest of the series. Same thing in 2015 with the Cleveland Cavaliers and Golden State Warriors. LeBron James and his team up 2-1 after 3 games. Golden State goes on to win the next 3 and win the series. Also, 2013, another LeBron James team on the other side of it, the Heat go down 2-1 against the Spurs. They actually got blown out in that game 3, but then went on to win the series in 7. So do we have to kind of feel like whoever wins tonight is going to win the series. You can think that. Now, I have an interesting lean on this series and I guess the game as well. I picked the Nuggets in 6 to win the series. I'm still standing by that prediction, especially given what we saw in Game 2. Granted, again, playing the result a little bit. Yes, they lost Game 2, but it was a game that, they technically gave away in a sense. If Miami doesn't shoot, half as well as they did in the fourth quarter, that's a game that they probably lose. And we also have not seen the same kind of playoff Jimmy that we've seen in previous series so far in the first 2 games of this series. So I think Miami does have a pretty good chance of winning tonight. Also, for my betting friends out there, Miami is the underdog at home. Kind of leaning their way here tonight in Game 3. But I could see this being a situation like we talked about with some of these recent series where even with them winning Game 3, they still go on to lose the series in 6 or 7 games. So I do think we're going to get a close one tonight. I do think if Denver is going to win this game, they got to get some better performances out of those role players. You saw Nikola Jokic in Game 2, 41 points, 11 rebounds, but just 4 assists. Jamal Murray had 10 assists, but just 18 points. Michael Porter Jr., we're going to have to start putting him on milk cartons or newspaper ads, something. He's going to miss it these first 2 games. Went 2 for 11 from three-point range in Game 1. I believe it was just 2 for 7 shooting overall in Game 2. So definitely need him to step it up on the offensive end. You got guys like Kentavious Caldwell-Pope who, his offense has not been there. He also had 2 very bad fouls on three-point shots in Game 2 as well that really, if you look at it, kind of costs Denver the game in a sense. So the role players for Denver have to step up. On the flip side of that, Miami's role players have to keep this going. We mentioned Max Strus, Duncan Robinson combining for 24 of their 36 in the fourth quarter in Game 2. They are going to have a similar performance here, especially at home, getting that Miami crowd behind them. Those role players are going to have to come up big. And I also think between one of these 2 games, because I also think that we're going to probably get a split in some way in these 2 games in Miami, whether it's Denver winning tonight and losing Game 4 or vice versa, Miami winning tonight and losing Game 4. I do think we go back to Denver for Game 5 tied 2 games apiece. So, regardless of how tonight shakes out, I think we can kind of bet on the opposite reaction or opposite action happening in Game 4. But we need one of those vintage Jimmy Butler performances at some point if Miami is not only going to win this game but potentially win the series. And we got to see how much he actually has left in the tank, given the crazy run he's been on so far throughout all of the playoffs. So, official prediction: Game 3. I'm leaning towards Miami. Again, think it's going to be a very close game. FanDuel has this as a 2.5 point spread in Denver's favor. I think Miami's live to win this Game 3. They're going to be feeding off that home crowd. They have that momentum coming off of the Game 2 win. Again, this Denver team was 37-1 at home going into Game 2 when they lead after 3 quarters at home. Only the second game that they lost at home pretty much all year long when they've led after 3 quarters. Is that an anomaly, or is that more of, an indication of what type of Heat team we're actually dealing with? I'm going to err on the side of anomaly, but at the same time, I'm going to pick the Heat to win Game 3 while still keeping the Nuggets to win the series. I just think when you get to the NBA Finals, man, you get these back-and-forth matchups. Styles make fights. These 2 teams are definitely not what you would have thought of as evenly matched coming into this series, but I think it's going to shake out that way here over the course of the next couple of games. And we've also seen, this Denver team, they lost Game 3 in the second round against Phoenix on the road, went on to win that series in 6. Now, granted, they started that one up 2-0, but of course it was tied 2 games apiece after 4, kind of the same way that I'm predicting now. So give Denver that home game in Game 5. I think they can go out, win that, close it in Game 6 in Miami. So Denver still wins the series, but I do lean towards the Heat winning tonight in Game 3. Official prediction there. So before we wrap up, though, I want to hit on a couple quick pieces of news around the NBA that are not directly tied to these NBA Finals. You have Frank Vogel being hired as the new Phoenix Suns head coach here. Frank Vogel pretty good coach. And I hesitate to say great coach just because, of course, we haven't seen it in a ton of different places, but was a great fit there in Indiana in those Paul George, Roy Hibbert years. Obviously led my Lakers to a championship in the bubble. Didn't obviously finish that great, but I think more of that was due to the whole Russell Westbrook experiment going bad as opposed to Frank Vogel not being a good coach. So he gets another chance at a head coaching job there in Phoenix. But to be honest, I don't think that that's really the story. I think the story is going to be what they do with that roster this offseason. You got questions around whether or not you're going to be able to keep Chris Paul healthy to play with Kevin Durant, Devin Booker. If you did move on from him, what can you get in return? There's already talks that they're probably going to move on from DeAndre Ayton this offseason, which, I mean, you could have just moved on from him last offseason before you gave him the max deal, but what do I know? I'm not an NBA GM, right? So not sure what they were thinking on that one, but the roster is going to be the more important part of this story rather than just Frank Vogel being hired on as the head coach. He does bring a defensive first mentality to that team, which I'm interested to see how that plays out, especially given, how Devin Booker was able to play individually on defense this postseason. Definitely took a level up for him. What does that do for the rest of the roster once they get it in place? We'll see. So another note here, Adam Silver was speaking in some of these NBA Finals press conferences here in between games the other day, mentioned that expansion is definitely on the to-do list here for the NBA. We know that they just agreed to and ratified a new collective bargaining agreement. That agreement, of course, is going to start this offseason. Then, of course, they're going to negotiate a new TV rights deal. So, your TNTs, ESPNs, ABCs, those networks are obviously going to continue to try to be in the mix. We'll see what that means as far as who hosts what playoff games on their networks. What does it mean for League Pass? Are there any other networks that get involved with this? Maybe an Amazon or Apple TV try their hand at the NBA like they've tried at some other sports, like the NFL, MLB, things like that. So TV rights will come first, but did specifically mention that expansion is next on the to-do list after that. Now, I know some of my folks here in St. Louis are hoping that we get an NBA team. Gotta say, I'm not very optimistic about that. I think the NBA is locked in on being able to get teams in Seattle and Las Vegas. Biggest thing with that is that they're probably going to have to move a current Western Conference team to the East if that were to happen. My guess is Memphis would be that team since they're probably the most, from a geographic standpoint, the easternmost Western Conference team in the league. So I think that makes the most sense if you get both of those teams out west, Memphis to move out to the Eastern Conference, and that might make for some interesting basketball, given the roster construction and how some of those other teams are set up. So definitely keeping an eye out on the expansion. And then finally, we got to get into this Kyrie recruiting LeBron James thing. Apparently, Kyrie Irving had tried his hand at recruiting LeBron James to Dallas to play with him after he re-signs with Dallas this offseason. Ridiculous. Let's just call it what it is. It's ridiculous. LeBron's not packing up from LA and going to Dallas, especially not after Bronny has already committed to USC. So I do think there's just smoke being blown around there. There's nothing really happening there. There was a rumor that Dallas was looking into trading for LeBron this season once the Lakers start spiraling downhill, even though LeBron couldn't be traded this past season because of when he signed his contract extension. So don't think that there's any real fire coming from that smoke, so to speak. So LeBron probably not going anywhere unless he decides to retire or ask for a trade. And even then, Dallas doesn't have the pieces to send back to the Lakers if they really wanted to make a LeBron James move. So there it is. That's all we'll speak on to that. There's no real concern at all about LeBron going to Dallas. Maybe if he played for the Cowboys, but not the Mavericks. I'm sorry. So got game 3 tonight. Game 4 will be on Friday night. We'll probably be back here on the Price Check between games 4 and 5. Also, really quick shout out to new In the Zone Network member Anthony Miller. Anthony joins us from the XFL News Hub, has been covering a lot of alternative football and even some NFL here in previous years, but is now covering the Dallas Wings for us here for In the Zone Network. We're still going to do some football talk too, but at some point here in the near future, we will have Anthony on the show to talk through his experience so far covering the Dallas Wings, and what he thinks as far as the rest of the WNBA season goes, not only for Dallas, but for some of the other contenders in the league as well. And then again, as I mentioned on some previous shows, we got a little bit of a fan experience thing that we're planning here for the Price Check, so stay tuned for that in the coming weeks as the season wraps up. But until next time, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me here on the Price Check Podcast. I am your host, Josh Price. Check it out.